Welcome to Season 4 of AIHA's podcast series, The Healthier Workplaces Show, where we explore timely and informative topics about occupational and environmental health and safety. I'm your host, Alejandro Castillo. Today's episode is part of our Luminary Series. I have the pleasure of speaking with industrial hygienist Zack Mansdorf. We are going to talk to Zack about his 50-plus years in OEHS and learn how the field has changed since he started his career. Zack is a distinguished leader in occupational and environmental health, safety, and sustainability. In 1998, he was recognized as one of the top 10 most influential industrial hygienists. For more than 5 decades, his career has spanned government service, academia, consulting, and senior corporate leadership, including his tenure as Senior Vice President of Safety, Health, and Environment at the cosmetics company called L'Oreal. Zack founded the consulting firm Mansdorf & Associates, which he also led for more than 10-plus years. In these roles, he focused on risk management, industrial hygiene, and global environmental health and safety strategies, including on projects for NIOSH on chemical, biological, radioactive, and nuclear incident response. Zack served as president of AIHA in 1996 and remains active in advancing the profession. Zack, thanks for joining us today.
Alejandro, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Let's get started. How did you discover OEHS and what made you become so interested in this field?
You know, it's kind of a winding story. I was actually born and raised in Akron, Ohio. I've lived a lot of places, but that's where I'm originally from. As it turns out, AIHA is originally from Akron, Ohio. The original offices were run by Bill McCormick. I actually had a chance to meet him in Akron. Anyway, I went to the University of Akron. I worked a lot of different jobs to go through school. And one of the jobs I had, I went to work for a place called the Creative Biology Laboratory. And we worked on a lot of different projects that were related to creative biology, including control of water hyacinths using anti-fouling materials and using various herbicides injected in rubber and so forth and so on. Worked on things like thermal protective films. So I at the conclusion of when I graduated, I had the opportunity to go to University of Michigan on a fellowship. And I thought, no, this is more exciting, the research I was doing at this creative biology lab. I got promoted there, mostly students working there, but there were a few professors as well. And so I thought, I'm gonna stay with it, and did a lot of public speaking and so forth. And then I realized they weren't calling me sir or anything like that because I was young. Mm-hmm. And I said, I'll go to Michigan. So I went to Michigan, University of Michigan, on a fellowship. And actually the fellowship was in water and wastewater, not in industrial hygiene. And one of my classmates, who also was on a fellowship there, again, on water, wastewater, was Bob Herrick. Bob Herrick later became a division director for NIOSH, and later on went on to Harvard University, where he taught industrial hygiene at Harvard, and actually has a PhD from Harvard. So going on, I graduated from Michigan, and one of the courses I took a survey course on industrial hygiene, along with a number of other courses on epidemiology and other topics. And I thought it was pretty interesting, and kind of related to being, I like the detective part of it, where you're trying to figure out what was wrong. So I decided that I would stay at Michigan, and I'd work on a PhD in toxicology, actually, working on something I had done at the lab. This was on tributyl tin oxide. As it turns out, that year they cut the funding for the schools of public health. I lost my funding, as did some others. And so I actually ended up taking a direct commission in the Army, along with Bob Herrick, as a matter of fact. And I took a direct commission, and I became an environmental science officer. And it was a mix of various things, including being at the RPO for Walson Army Hospital, the radiation protection officer. So as time went on and I got more involved in worker health, soldier health, if you like, I decided, well, this sounds very interesting, and maybe I'll pursue this a little further. So while I was there, I also, when I was at Michigan, I had worked as a programmer, doing programming and solid waste gaming. trying to figure out the best path and best way for handling solid waste. So that drew the attention of a professor at Drexel University, which was in Center City, Philadelphia, close to Fort Dix, New Jersey. And I ended up becoming a full-time student at Drexel. Needless to say, I was in the military, so I went at night, 5 nights a week. And I did this for 2 years. And then the Army decided to send me to Korea. So that ended Drexel. I went to Korea and spent a year there. And then I came back and I thought, oh, what am I going to do now? Well, I decided I had an opportunity to go to work for OSHA. They were looking for people. And I went to work for the national office. I worked for the Office of Training and Education and Training. And it was a great experience. It was during the time when they were first writing up a lot of the regulations. And so it was a pretty exciting time. I got to teach at the OSHA Training Institute in Chicago. And but after a while, I decided that, I had a better opportunity for me at Goodyear. When I was a student at Akron U, I had worked there on the so-called squad. It was one of the many jobs I had. And so I was pretty familiar with Goodyear. It was the largest company in Akron at the time, in the rubber capital. So I went to work for Goodyear as an industrial hygienist, but I did safety as well. It was kind of a special case. But what was exciting about it was I got to do some really different things. Well, first and foremost, because of my radiation protection background, I became the radiation protection officer for Goodyear. And their research department had a very large cesium source. And then we had a lot of other gauging devices and so forth and so on. So that was interesting. Well, I got to do some other strange things. So this was when the cotton dust standard came out from OSHA. So believe it or not, Goodyear at that time had their own farms. They actually grew cotton. They had a ginning operation. They used that to produce, fibers for tires. So I got to see a huge variety of processes. Learned quite a bit. And I worked with a couple of other pretty outstanding hygienists. I worked for a guy by the name of Bob Modrell, one of the early founders in industrial hygiene, who later ended up working for me when I had my consulting firm, but quite a good boss. And so I had a lot of great experiences there at Goodyear, did a lot of different things. This was at the start of the benzene standard, so they had factories all over the world, actually. But I did some early benzene sampling back in those days out in Los Angeles, for example. And I know one of the issues is how things have changed. But even back then, well, it's quite a while ago, but nevertheless, we were using imbingers even back then. Those are rarely used these days. Anyway, worked for Goodyear, and then went from Goodyear to running a group at the Midwest Research Institute in Kansas City, Missouri. So that was the transition. I think I became well known for my work in hygiene, but in reality, I also worked in safety and in the environment. And in fact, when I was at Midwest Research Institute, I became a full-time student at the University of Kansas, again, working on a PhD. So, but I guess what's most notable about my experience at Midwest was that we did a huge project for NIOSH, kind of a state-of-the-art project, in which case we looked at the recycling of solid waste materials and source reduction. So in the old days, you pretty much buried. The cheapest way to handle waste was to bury it.
Of course.
Without processing. That's right. So there was a new technology that was started, but there was a lot of concerns about the health effects of this new technology. So there are two options for handling municipal waste. And by the way, this is the project that I worked on when I was at Michigan. Um, that was this gaming device to determine where to put transfer stations, what routing the trucks would take, that sort of thing.
So it's a full circle.
Yes, a full circle. That's correct. And in fact, that's what attracted me to Drexel when they found out I had a programming background. So I was actually a student of both the engineering school and the business school. Anyway, going back to Midwest Research Institute, through NIOSH, we decided we would do a nationwide study on the technology for handling waste, municipal solid waste. There are two ways, as I was saying, there were two ways to do it. The first way would be that you would take and just do a mass burn. You would take the trash at one end, run it through incinerator, reduce the amount of stuff you would have. I mean, some things won't burn, of course, metals, for example. Mm-hmm. And then you could further process it. You could separate out the metals using magnets, those sorts of things. But not super effective. There were some plants that were doing this. And you could capture the heat and generate steam. And then from the steam, you could generate either just heat for various purposes, or you could actually generate electricity. So the other option would be to run it through a shredder. This is a reciprocal hammering mill. It's a sort of a giant thing that you can imagine these hammer heads flipping around, very high speed, very large hammers, and they would actually shred whatever happened to be in that waste stream.
Wow.
Yeah. But you immediately, you think about this and you think, okay, first issue you have is there going to be protection for the hammer mill such that if somebody puts in a waste gas can, what happens, when that hammer hits it, it could explode. That's the first issue. Or somebody does something crazy like throws a dynamite in their waste can.
Yeah.
And, so that's the first issue. The second issue is potentially a fire. And then there's a third issue. And this is the one that, I think most people could relate to. What is the effect on the workers from taking things like Pampers and shredding them and aerosolizing them such that they're in the air? So it's whatever hazardous material you might have that gets into the waste stream, shredding it up, aerosolizing it, what are the effects? What about viruses, for example?
Of course.
Those sorts of things. So we did quite a state-of-the-art study. We visited 7 sites. We looked at bacterial environments. We looked at viral environments. We did all sorts of air sampling, as you might suspect. We did other kinds of sampling to look and see whether or not, what was the best way to handle it? What were the health effects on the workers? What should the safety precautions and industrial hygiene precautions be, so forth and so on. So this study took about a year, and it was quite well done. So, and there was a team of about 13 or 14 of us that did this work. I was the principal investigator. So it was, we did a lot of other projects as well, research-oriented projects, but that was probably one of the most notable ones.
Absolutely. So you mentioned you had positions in OSHA, Goodyear, and of course the Midwest Research Institute. Out of those 3, is there any particular challenges that you overcame?
I think one of the bigger challenges is, putting together the right team to do things. So that was the case at Goodyear. That was the case certainly at Midwest Research Institute as well. So you have people that were bacteriologists, for example, that were needed on the project, those sorts of things. And then working with a team and directing a team and having influence on what the outcome would be. So.
Absolutely. Now, you did touch upon it briefly. You founded Mansdorf and Associates in 1981, and you ran it for more than a decade. What are some of the most impactful projects you led, and how has this work influenced OHS practices at that time?
Yeah, that was quite the adventure. Had a great experience at Midwest, but that's pretty much working all the time. Akron was our home, so decided to come back, start up a business. In the beginning, there were just a couple of us. And then as time went on, the business grew. We were very boutique-ish, ended up with about, well, 3 PhDs, notable people in the field, every 13 or 14 master's level industrial hygienists. We worked across areas. It wasn't just hygiene or just safety. We did some environmental, a fair amount of environmental work as well. But during this period, there were two things that were going on, which we had some involvement with. The first thing that was going on was the advent of asbestos removal and remediation. Mm-hmm. So early on some very large projects, before it became work primarily for technicians, we did some work for the VA. In fact, we spent, there was a VA that was fairly close to where the offices were. We spent over a year there helping them with the management of asbestos removal in VA hospitals, and other places as well. It wasn't just there. And then later on, there was a licensing act, and it became sort of a commodity exercise. So we didn't necessarily pursue it. The other thing that was happening at the same time was there was a huge emphasis on the restoration of sites, either through places like Love Canal, for example. These were sites where materials had been deposited, or there had been some incident. And at that time, again, same approach. In most cases, you just buried it in a municipal landfill or in some other landfill. So there was a program called FUSERAP, and FUSERAP stood for a Formally Utilized Site Remedial Action Plans. This was actually a DOE effort. And what it was at one time, well, it was during the war, and actually just after World War II, highly enriched uranium was brought into the U.S. and was processed in the U.S. And it was processed at multiple locations. One of the first sites where it was taken in was in a place called Middlesex, New Jersey. There was an assay operation there in a building. This was all, of course, as you might imagine at that time, secret. But anyway, they would assay the uranium. It was like 6, 7, 8%, which is fairly enriched, but not at a weapons level. They would assay it, and then what was left, they would use to, they would put it in a landfill, the local landfill. Well, the landfill became radioactive, of course. And, yeah, and so it was necessary to remediate it. And so there was a group that had that role of digging up this entire landfill. Now, mind you, this landfill happened to be right next to a day school. So we operated surveillance on the air, as you might suspect, as well as radiation element of it and other elements. You never know what you're going to dig up. So we had a person or persons there full time for about 2 years, operating, making sure that the trucks, when they left the site, had been cleaned and weren't carrying any radioactive material with them, and so forth and so on. That was one interesting project. We had another project, similar kind of a project near Love Canal, on a remediation of an industrial site. Similar kind of story. Another one that lasted about a year. We had another one. We had several like that, but let me give you the one that maybe was the most interesting one. I had a phone call from there was a company that we did a lot of work with, known as OEHS Materials. I don't think they exist any longer, but I was friends with the head of health, safety, and environment for them, who had been an ex-Coast Guard man who was actually a chemical engineer, quite good. Fred Halverson was his name. And so Fred called me and he said, "We've got a big problem down in Brazil, and I need somebody to go there soon." I said, "Okay, fine. How soon?" He said, "Well, today." So they actually, there was a contractor at the site, this steel mill. This is a very large steel mill, and it's located just outside of Valari Steel, just located outside of Sao Paulo, Brazil. There was a person that had responsibility for rodent control, and they were not very successful, this company. So the problem was that they had a rat population, and that rat population was eating the cables, the electrical cables. So as a consequence, they got pretty desperate, and they managed to get a hold of some material that had been banned in the US and was actually banned in Brazil. It's called 1080, and extremely poisonous for mammals, and including humans, and actually canines as well, I might add. But so there was a worker there who was doing some landscaping, and he was cutting the grass, and there was 1080 there. It's a powder, very water soluble, and he managed to aerosolize it, and the worker died, and then a couple other people died. So the Brazilian government stepped in. They shut the plant down. The workers, of course, were quite scared, and they walked off. So I led a group down there, and I guess one of the funny parts of the story, this was actually written up in the journal, the AIHA journal, by Fred, about this whole incident. But what was interesting about it was that the workers had put in canaries, like you would find in a mine. The problem is that 1080 is not poisonous for canaries, only humans and dogs, so and rats.
Wow.
Of course. Yeah. So, but what made the project so interesting was I worked with people that had worked in all kinds of horrible places and with very dangerous stuff. They were scared to death, and I actually had the opportunity to lead the group. If they said, "If you go with us, we'll go, but otherwise, no." So, yeah, but the stuff is pretty water soluble. We got it cleaned up. We were down there for quite a while. I was personally there for about a month and a half, and then others from my group were there for a few months, and we got it cleaned up and went back to work. So that was one of the more interesting projects that I had.
Out of curiosity, what is the typical PPE for this type of project?
That's a very good question. They're used to wearing a level A gear, and I said it really wasn't necessary. So a very good, an N95 type particulate respirator. We used full face. We didn't use half mask or whatever. Full face respirator. If you really want to be, go to the ultimate. If you actually find the 1080 and you're doing something with it, then of course you would wear a level A suit. That would be a fully encapsulating suit. I guess you would know, and many of the people that will listen to this podcast will know me from my work with chemical protective clothing. I've been teaching that course for years, written a number of books and so forth about it. But it actually started with Goodyear. I got on the ASTM F-23 committee when I was a Goodyear, and then stayed on it for about 30 years, I guess, and actually ended up being a fellow of ASTM for that F-23 committee. So that was another interesting aspect.
The AIHA Connect 2026 call for proposals is now open. Share your expertise with the OEHS community in New Orleans, Louisiana. We are seeking subject matter experts to present professional development courses, education sessions, case studies, scientific research, and professional posters. Share your insights with thousands of professionals and build credibility while contributing to worker safety. Submit your proposal today and advance the OEHS profession for a better tomorrow. Submissions are due by September 10th, 2025.
Let's transition more to your involvement with AIHA. You served as president in 1996. What was that like?
Yeah, it was quite exciting. I had not actually spent a lot of time on the board, but run through the offices. But I'd been involved in more than half of the AIHA technical committees of one type or another, ranging from ethics to job placement to whatever, mentoring, that kind of thing. It was quite the challenge. I made one big change that almost bit me, and that was AIHA had a policy that you could be on a committee for 3 years and then you would rotate off unless you were the chair. And so I implemented that policy, and I got quite the negative reaction, but I think it was the right thing to do. I would also add that that was pretty much the heyday of AIHA back in those days. We had at that time about a little over 13,000 members. So I think we can get there again, but it was a pretty exciting time. The other thing was I had the opportunity through the committee work and for other reasons, I got to know more than half of the past presidents of AIHA, so, and future presidents for that matter. So it's quite the good networking opportunity.
Absolutely. If you had to compare AIHA in the 1990s to how it is today, what would you say is different about those two organizations?
I think something that disturbs me a bit, I think hygiene is a great fundamental practice that really opens the door to lots of other things. And for me, I think the field has become narrower and narrower and narrower. And I think there is too much emphasis on exposure assessment. There are so many other aspects to industrial hygiene. And from industrial hygiene, there's no reason, given the STEM background that hygienists have, most hygienists have, you couldn't work on things like energy or work on things like, what's your carbon footprint, or problems that you have, for example, with Legionella potentially, or other biological issues. So I told you I was for me, for example, I was an RPO for half my career, and you never hear that talked about in industrial hygiene. And of course, there's the issue of ergonomics and other issues like that. I think it needs to be broader, not narrower.
Now, as an industrial hygienist with an influential and distinguished career, what is your opinion about how the role of an industrial hygienist is changing today?
Yeah, I think it's pretty critical today that you offer value to companies. And I think the place that you really offer the most value is helping them across the broad spectrum of EHS, not just on exposure assessment. So whether it's dealing with hazardous waste, whether it's dealing with recycling, whether it's dealing with wastewater, whether it's dealing with some other topics like the heat stress protection or emergency response or other areas, I think it's pretty critical. Whether you work in a group or if you only do hygiene, as it's kind of classified today, where it's exposure assessment, I think only the very largest companies would really have opportunities for you. And if you want to progress and get a seat at the table, so to speak, then I think you need to be able to do things beyond just hygiene.
In the early 2000s, you served as Senior Vice President of Safety, Health, Environment at L'Oreal. You oversaw operations across 40 manufacturing sites and more than 100 distribution centers worldwide. What were the biggest OEHS challenges of such a diverse global operation?
Yeah, I think you said it well. It's because it was so diverse. I had an opportunity to travel, and I had other jobs where I had opportunity to travel quite a bit internationally, but particularly at L'Oreal. I will tell a very, very quick story. So we were redoing a plant in Pune, India, and we had a group of women, about 30 women, whose job it was to make sure that when they dug up the dirt, that the earthworms were protected. They were Buddhists, and they didn't, you don't kill things because they believe in reincarnation.
Of course.
So you need to adapt to the culture, and that's the key. But I will say this: maybe one of the best things about L'Oreal was, and it's a very good organization, they had the same standard everywhere in the world. So it didn't matter whether you were in China, or whether you were in India, or whether you were in Italy, or whether you were in Paris. The same standards applied. And I think the best companies do that. They take best practice and they apply it worldwide. They may make adjustments for the culture, various cultures, but they apply these standards worldwide.
Chemical Protective Clothing 3rd edition is available now. The revised 3rd edition provides a comprehensive overview of the considerations necessary for implementing a successful protective clothing and equipment program. Scan the QR code or click the link below for more information.
Since 2009, you worked as a consultant in AIHS and sustainability, including on NIOSH projects related to chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear emergencies. What was the most rewarding part of this phase of your career?
After my retirement at L'Oreal, I worked for another 10 years as a consultant for ERM, which later became BSI. I did a lot of travel, did a lot of work in China, a huge amount of work in China. I was one of the principal consultants that were used by Apple, doing work over there. And I did work in other places as well. I think for me that the challenge was I took on jobs that I thought were challenging, not routine. And for me, that was the part that kept me going. That's the part that I enjoyed the most, challenges. So whether it was something about, combustible dust, or evaluating a research operation to make it better, or teaching Chinese about health, safety, and environment, or all those kinds of things. That was the most rewarding for me.
I have a feeling that either every day or every project is never the same for you.
That's exactly right. That's what intrigued me. I mentored a lot of people, and I've told them, if you want 8 to 5, you can go to work for a large company. It's never 8 to 5, but if you want a challenge, then there's no greater challenge than doing consulting, because it tends to be different all the time. And for me, I took on jobs that, where they could use my experience and background. So a lot of challenging jobs, actually.
So you taught at Cleveland State University and Harvard, as well as led AIHA professional development courses. What roles have teaching and mentorship played in your career, and what roles do you believe play in advancing the profession?
I'm a strong believer in mentorship and giving back, and teaching is maybe one of the best ways to do it. I actually enjoy it. I think it's the key. I think, that's your footprint in the sands of time, and mentoring people and watching them succeed, that's a rewarding experience. So for me, that was quite important.
So here's my final question. What advice would you give the next generation of OEHS professionals who want to make a lasting impact in this field?
So as you probably can tell from what we've discussed, I've always felt like I wanted to be challenged. Most of my career, I've worked and gone to school at the same time. I would say, as far as advising new people in the field, broaden your skills, broaden your knowledge, be of more value. And then when you reach that point where you can contribute, then contribute to others and share your knowledge. That would be my advice, whether it's writing, teaching, mentoring, or some other form of helping others. It's a very noble profession, and I think the most rewarding part of it is watching other people grow.
Zach, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
That wraps up today's episode of the AIHA's Healthier Workplaces show. To learn more, visit the AIHA website and follow us on social media. Thank you for tuning in, and as always, remember that healthier workplaces mean a healthier world. Until next time.